Hey, I'm Noam Weissman, and this is Unpacking Israeli History, the podcast that takes a deep dive into some of the most intense, historically fascinating, and often misunderstood events and stories linked to Israeli history. Before we start, one more thing. Unpacking Israeli History is on Instagram, on YouTube, TikTok, all the different places. Just search Unpacking Israeli History and follow or subscribe. Okay, yalla, let's do this.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
We, the people of Israel, are prepared and anxious to meet the representatives of our neighbors without any preconditions.
There are people in Israel and elsewhere say it's impossible to make peace between the Arabs and Israel or the Jewish people. I think they are wrong.
8 months ago, when Israel first struck Iran in Operation Rising Lion, I shared the following reflection. Living through history can be terrifying. It means sitting in a bomb shelter for hours on end, listening to the impact of ICBMs whistling through the air from nearly 1,000 miles away, sent by a government that is considered tyrannical by many, that has no problem murdering its own people, and even less problem murdering you. It means turning on your phone after a Jewish holiday and seeing that all your worst nightmares have come to life. That the massive terrorist attack you heard about in synagogue that morning didn't kill 10 people or 30 or 100, that instead more than 1,000 Israelis are dead, that hundreds more have been dragged into captivity, and everything you knew about yourself and your Judaism and your Zionism has been shaken to the core. Look, I still believe that. People I love are still running in and out of bomb shelters. People I don't know are being displaced or maimed or killed all over the Middle East. And when I'm not glued to X or Instagram or TikTok or the news or WhatsApps with people in Israel or friends who have loved ones in Iran, I'm still talking and thinking about this war, praying for the best outcome possible, uncertain of what that even is, unable to concentrate on anything but the historic moment unfolding before us now. But underneath the exhaustion, the adrenaline, the stress eating of hamantash, and no side note, I am not into that Jewish triangular pastry. I'm outing myself. It's wildly overrated. Jewish people, I vote that we replace hamantash with babka as our national dish for the Purim holiday. Anyway, underneath all of that and all my opinions about pastries runs an undercurrent of awe. And it's that awe I want to focus on today. Not up-to-the-minute reporting, which will be outdated before this episode even airs. Not historical analysis of the conflict between Israel, the US, and the Islamic Republic, which is immensely important. Not even the personal experiences of the innocent civilians all over the region who are watching the skies explode above them and wondering what their lives will look like in a week, a month, a year. I'm not here for the geopolitical commentary about who the proxies are, who the real superpowers are, whether it's Israel and Iran or the proxies of Hezbollah and the Houthis, whether the real geopolitical war is between the United States and China. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot. And there's a time for all of that. For the commentary from the experts, the historical context, even personal reflections from the front lines. But I'm recording and releasing this on the Jewish holiday of Purim. And on Purim, I want to focus on awe, on what Purim's about. If you know the history of it, it's about the concept of hidden miracles, on resilience and resonance and the echoes of history. Maybe you've heard this little Jewish joke that every Jewish holiday can be summed up as, they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. Well, Purim is kind of that cliche on steroids. The holiday commemorates the averted genocide of every Jew in the Persian Empire. The story, which is related in Megillat Esther, the Scroll of Esther, goes something like this. King Ahasuerus, believed by some historians to be the Emperor Xerxes I. I don't know if that's Xerxes, like Game of Thrones, but Xerxes, I don't know. Anyway, Ahasuerus, he's more interested in partying and drinking than ruling the 127 provinces under his command. He outsources the important decisions to his prime minister guy, a grand vizier, a guy named Haman or Haman, who I am convinced was the inspiration for Jafar in Aladdin, a scary, power-hungry megalomaniac who insists on having everyone bow to him as he rides through the streets. Real normal stuff. But when a Jewish guy, a Jew named Mordecai, refuses to bow, Haman gets so ticked off that he asks Ahasuerus for permission, ready for this, to slaughter every single Jew in the empire. And because Ahasuerus is, more interested in beauty pageants and lavish parties than, making sure no one gets murdered on his watch, he's like, sure, cool, whatever, all good. They choose a date for the slaughter. They send out memos to every province in the empire, even the really far-flung ones, letting them know that once the month of Adar rolled around, it's open season on the Jews and their property. Nerd corner alert. Adar is a Persian name. The Jewish people were deeply integrated into Persian society, adopting the local language and even the calendar. Understandably, the Jewish community of Persia goes into mourning. But they don't know that Mordecai has a secret weapon inside the palace. His relative Esther, who's either his cousin, his niece, his foster daughter, or maybe his wife at some point. I don't know, man. It was 2,500 years ago. People had some different family arrangements, and I'm never exactly clear on this one. I'm just not. Anyway, at this point in this story, Esther is married to Ahasuerus, which makes her Empress of the Persian Empire. No one knows she's Jewish. And when she learns about this genocidal decree and about what she needs to do to stop it, she's terrified. You don't just walk up to a guy who controls half the world and ask for favors, even if he's your husband. But in my favorite verse in the entire Hebrew Bible, boom, here it is right here, chapter 4, verse 14, Mordecai reminds her, Umi odea, im la'ed kazot higat lemachut. Who knows? Perhaps you were placed in this position for just this moment. So Esther gins up her courage and exposes the evil plot, telling her husband that this creepy Grand Vizier wants to slaughter her and her people. The king hangs Haman, reverses the genocidal decree, installs Mordecai as his new Grand Vizier, and they all live happily ever after. It's your classic feel-good story. We read it twice, the Jewish people, we read it twice. On Purim, at night and in the morning. Yes, I just told it simply. Yes, there are lots of ways to read the story, so chill out. But it's impossible to ignore its historical echoes as the Americans and Israelis enter the fourth day of Operation Roaring Lion, that's what it's called in Israel, and Operation Epic Fury, as it's called in the US. Because once again, just like Haman, the Ayatollahs in charge of Iran called for a genocide. They spent 47 years establishing proxies that would attack Jews all over the world, building an arsenal of long-range ballistic missiles and frantically trying to acquire a nuclear weapon, all the while calling for the so-called Little Satan, that's Israel, to be wiped from the pages of time. And just in time, a Jewish woman assesses the considerable risk to her own life and steps up to the plate anyway because it's her time, because this was what she was put on earth to do. If there is an Esther in this scenario, it's the state of Israel, whose leaders assessed that this is the moment. But I want to stay in that theme. I want to investigate it. Because time, the right time, the appointed time, plays a significant role in the story of Purim. The genocide doesn't happen right away. It's meticulously planned and widely announced. Haman wanted to give the empire time to prepare. He wants the Jews to have time to freak out. And Esther, who took the throne shortly before he conceived of this plan, swooped in at just the right time to save her people. But is this the right time for all-out war with the Islamic Republic? Why now? Why right before Purim? Why 8 months after the 12-Day War, which was supposed to have taken out Iran's nuclear infrastructure? Why is this the time? It's so easy to draw parallels to other events. Leave Purim aside for a second. The historical record is hazy on whether the story happened as written. The Hebrew Bible is more about teaching truth with a capital T than facts. Something can be true without ever having happened, but that's a rabbit hole for another time. So let's talk about parallels to slightly more recent events, like World War II, or even the Iraq War in 2003. Both of those wars featured an almost comically evil bad guy with an iconic mustache hell-bent on genocide. Remember, Saddam Hussein did actually try to exterminate the Kurdish people and threatened to burn Tel Aviv to the ground. Both of those wars came with a horrible price. Back in the 1930s, the Europeans tried desperately to appease Hitler. They didn't want war. They just wanted the crazy guy to annex German-speaking territories and leave the rest of Europe alone. Appeasement didn't work out so hot with Hitler, just as it didn't with the Ayatollah, who never softened on his stance towards anything. And after Hitler invaded Poland, though, the rest of Europe had no choice. They had to go to war. But I understand why American isolationists looked at that mess across the Atlantic and said, that's their problem, not ours. Now, they were wrong, obviously. But without 2020 hindsight, I understand the hesitation. And in the end, once the U.S. had no choice, the U.S. got involved too. And though the United States did not pay as heavy a price as the European countries, we Americans nonetheless lost more than 400,000 soldiers in just 4 years. 400,000. My grandfather, Irving, Saba Irving as I call him, fought on D-Day on the shores of Normandy, France. He proudly served his people and his country, the U.S. And I know that his story, which ends in triumph, could have ended so differently, as it did with many of his friends. I know that. I honor that. So I understand the anti-war voices coming from both the left and the right in the United States. I understand why many are concerned that President Trump went to war without first outlining a plan or seeking approval from Congress. I understand that Operation Epic Fury is not a defensive action addressing an imminent threat to the U.S., as far as we know right now, even though we know that Iran had tons of enriched uranium. But I get why someone might look at the U.S.'s involvement in this war and say, wait, Iran isn't doing anything to the U.S. directly. Why are we fighting Israel's war? Why are American soldiers dying for a conflict thousands of miles away? I said I understand it, not that I agree. At this moment, I want to be direct about how I am seeing this. So here you're getting opinion, not fact, something that people don't often preface with. War is painful always, but in this moment, I lean towards optimism, while recognizing that A, my feelings might change as it continues, and B, I'm not a geopolitical expert with deep inside knowledge. Still, despite my optimism, I understand why at the time of this recording, some 4 days into the war, nearly 60% of Americans oppose this war, as they are wary about getting involved in another war in the Middle East. Historically, that's been quite difficult for us Americans. But here is the difference between this war and the war in Iraq, or even World War II. Time. If you look at history on the shortest possible time scale, the next few months, the here and now, then wariness about this war makes sense. But I want to view this with a tool of the kaleidoscope and view this through the long arc of Jewish history. The Jewish people have been around a long time, and we don't take a short view of history. Our view of history is very, very long. Our story stretches back thousands of years. And though it has held its fair share of tragedies, we have a fascinating through line in our history. I'll explain. In college, I took a class taught by the great professor J.J. Schachter about Jewish responses to communal catastrophe. And there were a lot of responses because sadly, there were a lot of communal catastrophes. And as we delved into each one, I always marveled at the fact that logically, rationally, Judaism and the Jewish people should have curled up and disappeared a long time ago. Just be done with the whole Judaism project. There are other peoples, there are other religions. It's exhausting, it's too much. One communal catastrophe, okay, maybe you survive, but millennia of them, it's enough. Our existence, though, the Jewish people's existence, isn't rational. Let's go through the history. After the Babylonians razed the first temple, displacing the Jewish people from their home and destroying the heart of their religious practice, the Jewish people should have been done. No more. Well, Jewish leaders learned to live in diaspora. They began educating their children differently, began adjusting their worship, began a process of adapting what would later transform Judaism completely. So when the Romans came around and destroyed Jewish life in Judea a second time, the sages were ready. From the Churban, the destruction, came rabbinic Judaism. From the ashes of the temple came the schools of Yavne in the land of Israel, and the academies of Sura and Pumbedita in what is now Iraq. From the ruins came the Mishnah, the Talmud, the liturgy we have today, the scholarship of generations of giants. Fast forward a few hundred years, when the Khmelnytsky uprising devastated the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe, claiming tens of thousands of lives The Jews of Eastern Europe responded by establishing a radical new movement, Chassidut, Hasidus, Hasidism, a joyous, mystical, Kabbalah-inflected worldview that eventually transformed Jewish life all over the world. And when the masses killed hundreds of thousands of Jews in pogroms in the 18th and 19th and early 20th centuries, state-sanctioned violence against Jewish communities, the Jewish people said enough is enough. We, the Jewish people, need sovereignty, and developed the ideas of Zionism. When the Nazis exterminated 1/3 of the world's Jews, when the Arab and Muslim states exiled nearly 1 million people, the survivors and refugees built a safe haven, a messy, flawed, complicated, imperfect, sometimes dysfunctional miracle of a Jewish state, a safe haven at last. And yet again, we are watching the reshaping of history. The Jewish response to communal catastrophe, this time at the national level. A few months ago, I recorded a podcast with Michael Koplow, Chief Policy Officer at the Israel Policy Forum. He said that October 7th was the most significant event in Israeli history, more than 1948. Here, I'll play it.
October 7th, which I think at this point is fair to say is the most significant event in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Maybe eclipsed by 1948, but I think you can make an argument either way.
So, Michael, October 7th is the biggest day in Israeli-Palestinian history since 1948, maybe including 1948. Or you're including 1967 in that statement. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
I am. Obviously, 1967 is a huge deal, transformed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in all sorts of ways. I think that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we're looking back at October 7th, it will have transformed the conflict and transformed the ground in even more significant ways. And at the moment, we're at an inflection point. I actually don't know in which direction this transformation is going to go. I think there are multiple plausible pathways. One of those pathways we're seeing unfold now diplomatically, which is a push for a Palestinian state. I think a more serious and widespread push than we have seen in decades. And there's another pathway, which is that Israel might finally transform its military occupation into a permanent annexation. So I do think that October 7th is going to end up being more impactful.
I was surprised by that at first. And then I thought about it a little more. And I realized, I think he's right. Look at how the Jewish people in their Jewish state responded to this moment. The Jewish state of October 6th no longer exists. The Jewish people of October 6th no longer exist. The world of October 6th no longer exists. They've all been reshaped, alchemized into something new. Sinwar basically opened a FanDuel account, bet the house that Israel would fold. Israel didn't just cover, they rewrote the lines mid-game, reshaping world history. One by one, the Ayatollah's proxies have been picked off. Hamas defanged, Hezbollah decapitated. Assad Syria, well, it's chaos, yes, but Assad the butcher is gone. And now the final boss, the quote, avuncular man the Washington Post bafflingly described, the number one exporter of global terror in the world, the regime that slaughtered tens of thousands of its own people, that strangled the indigenous and ancient culture of Persia, that hollowed out Lebanon and Syria, that blew up a Jewish community center in Argentina and a barracks full of American and French soldiers in Beirut, that took 52 American hostages for 444 days, that funded and supported terrorism around the world. That regime is dying before our eyes. And Israel is reshaping the Middle East, all because of what Hamas did on October the 7th. Koplow was right. I'm not saying these horrific tragedies, the destruction of the temples, the Khmelnytsky uprisings, the pogroms, the Holocaust, October the 7th, I'm not saying they were somehow worth it. I'm not saying that at all. But this is the hand we Jewish people were dealt. This is the timeline we were given. And it's what we do with that timeline that matters. Do we remain victims? Do we curl up into a ball and die an ancient people lost in the archives of history? Do we grab our passies and blankies? Or do we get up and rebuild? Do we reshape the world? Reshape ourselves, not just survive, but thrive? And I can't stop thinking about a bit of commentary on the story of Esther that Shmuel Silber, a rabbi in Baltimore and teacher of mine, introduced me to. It comes from a 19th century rabbi named Shlomo HaKohen Rabinowitz. It's a remarkable idea. When Mordechai first hears of Haman's genocidal decree, he goes into mourning, sackcloth, ashes, sitting outside the gates of the palace in lamentation, the whole 9 yards. And I get it. If I heard the prime minister, the grand vizier, had it out for me personally and it was planning to murder my people as a result of it because I wasn't enough of a sycophant to him, I'd be mourning too. But Esther doesn't approve of Mordechai's choice to sulk, as fair as it might be. The Megillah tells us that she sends him clothes so that he stops walking around looking like one of those apocalyptic street preachers wearing a cardboard sign and shouting that the end is near, or in the words of the Megillah. I'll say it in Hebrew first, because that's the original. Vatavona na'arot Esther, v'sariseh v'yagidu la, v'titchalchal hamalka me'od, v'tishlach begadim l'halbish et Mordechai, u'la'asir sako me'alav v'lo kibel. When Esther's maidens and eunuchs informed her that her uncle/cousin/foster father/ex-husband, appeared to be having a mental breakdown, the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordechai to wear so that he might take off his sackcloth, and he refuses. She tells Mordechai, this is a moment of devastation. And in a moment of devastation, you don't respond with despondence. You don't meet catastrophe by giving up, by wearing sackcloth. You meet it with action. You meet it by getting up and doing something. So she asks Mordechai to get up and help her, to stop sitting around being sad, to get up and do, to unite all the Jewish people of the city to bargain with God on her behalf. As the Megillah says, Lech kanos et kol haYehudim hanimtzaim b'Shushan, v'tsumu alai, v'al tochlu, v'al tishtu, shloshet yamim, laila vayom. Gam ani v'narotai atzum ken, u'v'chein avo el hamelech asher lo chadat, v'chasher avadati. Go assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it's contrary to the law. And if I'm to perish, then so be it. I'll perish. Here's what happens. V'ya'avor Mordechai v'ya'as kechol asher tzivta alav Esther. So Mordechai went around the city and did just as Esther told him to do, commanded him to do. For me, Esther is the clear hero of the story. Clearly. But notice, the Jews of Shushan had a role to play too. Esther begs for unity, for solidarity, and the Jews of Shushan deliver. The Hebrew Bible calls the Jewish people a stiff-necked people. And listen, the shoe fits. We can be fractious. We have a hard time agreeing on most things. The state of Israel seems to be in perpetual danger of falling apart from the inside. It holds on barely. So I'm not trying to pretend Jewish history has always been sunshine and roses, or that the Jewish people have always been unified and united. That's just not facts. But the Jewish people have responded to catastrophe time and again, not with despondency, depression, or passivity, or victimhood, but action and innovation. Back in ancient Persia, the Jewish people interceded on Esther's behalf before she could intercede for them. And once again, the great wheel of history is spinning. The map is changing. The cards are shuffling. The Jewish people are living through history like our ancestors did. We have been put here and now for such a time as this. It's terrifying. It's exhausting. It's awe-inspiring. Esther instructed us, do not be sackcloth Jews. Do not wallow in your sorrow and self-pity, even if everything is the worst. Get up and do. Be joyous, be present, be proud. And I would extend this to all human beings. This is a universal story. When catastrophe presents itself, do not be sackcloth people. Get up and do. Be joyous, be present, be proud. And that is how I am viewing this war with the Islamic Republic. As a new chapter in a very old story. An opportunity to get up, to do, to shake off the dust and rise and act. A historic moment that ends with a free and liberated Iranian people, with a stronger Jewish state, with a world that is less vulnerable to global terror. May we see better days, and soon. Amen. Unpacking Israeli History is a production of Unpacked, an OpenDor Media brand. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend who you think will appreciate it, and leave us a rating on Apple or Spotify. It really does help other people find our podcast and helps us grow the audience in the show, so please do that. It's really super helpful. This episode was produced by Rifki Stern. Our team for this episode includes Adi Elbaz and Rob Pera. I'm your host, Noam Weissman. Thanks for being here. See you next week.